In this lecture, we're going to dive into the official ChatGPT application by OpenAI. We won't be working directly with the API just yet, that's for the next lecture. I added this lecture to help you learn how to prompt ChatGPT to generate code, and not just any code, but detailed and useful code blocks. This means we'll be discussing prompt engineering again, which is incredibly important to level up your output. This lecture will be especially helpful for those who don't code or those with some coding experience. It'll show you how to quickly enhance your skills. So without any further ado, let me enter my prompt into ChatGPT, and I'm going to paste it in since it's a long, detailed prompt. And once I've pasted it in and once I've run it, I'll then explain it. So here is the prompt that you can see in the chat box. And you can see just how long and detailed it is. And with it entered, I'll now run it and we can see our output from ChatGPT. Let me now go into explaining the prompt because our output has been generated. So let me scroll back up. We can ignore the output for the moment, but let me scroll back up to our detailed prompt, and it's more clear to see here rather than in the chat box. So with this detailed prompt, what we're doing is we're asking ChatGPT to help us create a JavaScript function to use in Google Sheets/script to generate short replies to public course reviews. Furthermore, the prompt goes into detail by specifying the function's parameters, options objects, and how the function should interact with the API, which we can see in the areas that I've highlighted. And by crafting such a detailed prompt, we can get a more accurate and relevant output of code from ChatGPT. Now, I know this very detailed and extensive prompt can seem overwhelming at first, but don't worry, because I'm going to walk you through step by step even more now after that overview. So let's break this prompt down into the 4 elements of a prompt that I mentioned earlier in this course, in the prompt engineering section. So the 4 elements are, just to give you a recap, are task, input, output, and context. So first, let's talk about the task. And there are a few tasks that we define in this specific prompt. So let me explain. So to begin, we ask ChatGPT to create a script with the same name, ChatGPT. We say it must be able to generate short replies in first person casually. Furthermore, we want the script to take a prompt as an argument and return a message. Moving further and on to the next aspect, which is the input, we have actually put the input inside the prompt itself here. But within this prompt, in the first paragraph specifically, you can see that we specified that we want an input for the function as an argument, so the function takes a prompt as an input. Moving on to the output is of course the generated script, but within the actual script, so the prompt that we write, you can see that we want it to generate the output using GPT 3.5, i.e. ChatGPT, so what we're using right now. And we want the function to return the output as well. And then finally, we have the context. And in our prompt, we don't provide much context. However, we do give a lot of detailed instructions. So let me explain those as they verge onto context. So I've already covered this, but in the first paragraph, we say that we want to create a function named ChatGPT. And within that, we then ask it to create a payload object, and we define that here. So we define these specific settings. So we ask it to create a payload object that includes several of the required properties, and we define those. And we then ask it to create another object called options, which we define after the payload, and this contains the required properties as well. By the way, all of this information is detailed in the OpenAI documentation. I mentioned this in a previous project. It's good to get familiar with reading documentation so you can craft prompts like this and get the code that you need. And lastly, in the final paragraph, which also verges onto context, we ask it to create a post request for the specified link and pass the response from the API. So there you have it. We've unpacked a lot, but now you can see how this detailed prompt helps us to get the desired output from ChatGPT, which is this code block. So in this lecture, you've seen how helpful it can be to have some programming knowledge, even if you're not an expert. With a basic understanding and then tools like ChatGPT, you can seriously up your game, as we've demonstrated. Now, I've provided the updated code in the following lecture to ensure that it works. But when you're using ChatGPT to create code blocks, they may not work perfectly on first try. So even if you create such a detailed response, you might not get the perfect code block created here. So you might paste this into whatever program you're using, for example, whether you're putting it into VS Code or you're putting it into Google Sheets script as we're doing, and it might not work. So don't think that just because you write a really detailed prompt, the output is going to work the first time around. Now, if it doesn't, what you need to do is iteratively improve them. So to improve your code blocks via ChatGPT, whether they're too long or they're generating errors, try giving ChatGPT a prompt like this. So I'm going to paste it in and I'll quickly explain it while we're here. So let's just head over to this chat box and I'll paste in the template and let me explain it. So we have the code below, and then in between these quotations, so 3 on each side, you would insert your code that is not working or that you want to change. And then you would write, after you've inserted the code in between those quotations, generates this error. And then again, in between quotations, you'd enter the error. And then below that, you'd write, please provide the solution. And by iteratively working through errors like that with ChatGPT, you'll be able to really hone in on the code and what's not working, and it will be able to fix the code and get it working as you intend. Doing something like this is much better than giving a vague prompt. After all, these tools are only as good as the input that you're feeding them. So that wraps up this lecture on prompting ChatGPT for code. I know many of you might have been overwhelmed with the code in this lecture, but remember, even learning a little bit and then combining it with ChatGPT can really level up your skills. Now I'll explain the code that we use in the next lecture in a lot more detail. But keep in mind, you can also just paste the code into ChatGPT and ask it to explain it, how it works, or ask it to explain how a certain function or a certain line works. That's another fantastic use of ChatGPT. But for now, that's everything. Join me in the next lecture where we'll set up our script in Google Sheets.